evening. I'm Dana Stebbins, the Eastern Area Chair of Legislative and Public Affairs for the Links Incorporated. Welcome to an exciting conversation about Beyond the Ballot, forging ahead to serve our communities. We have an exciting, stimulating conversation ahead, and I can't wait for you to hear our esteemed panelists begin. Before that, though, I want to bring to the stage our Eastern Area Director, who will welcome you on behalf of the Eastern Area, Dr. Lisa Lowry Lomas.
Thank you very much, and good evening. What a joy it is to gather today virtually with people who care deeply about creating change that lasts long after the vote is counted. Tonight's conversation is about what comes next, how we take the energy, the lessons, and the momentum from the election season and turn them into meaningful action in our communities. We're here to talk about the policies and decisions that shape our lives and our future: women's reproductive rights, education, educational policy, and academic freedom, and the ongoing work to protect and celebrate Black history and culture. These are not issues on the national stage alone. They touch our homes, our families, our sense of justice and belonging. We have an incredible lineup to lead this discussion. Our moderator is Reverend Siobhan Airline Bradley, President and CEO of the National Council of Negro Women, a dynamic leader who truly embodies advocacy with purpose. Let me tell you a little bit more about Reverend Arline Bradley. Reverend Arline Bradley is the President and Chief Executive Officer for National Council of Negro Women and brings 21 years of experience in healthcare, diversity, equity, and inclusion, government affairs, and executive leadership. She is also the founding principal and CEO of REACH Beyond Solutions, a public health advocacy and executive leadership firm promoting DEI, political and organizational strategy, risk management, government affairs, and technical assistance. Prior to starting REACH, she served as senior advisor and director of external engagement during the Obama administration in the Department of Health and Human Services for the 19th U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vice Admiral Vivek H. Murthy. Before her tenure in the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General at the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People headquarters, Reverend Arline Bradley served as the Executive Vice President of Strategic Planning and Partnerships, as well as former Chief of Staff. She is a community advocate serving in leadership capacity in the following organizations: Delta for Women for Action and the NAACP Board of Directors Health Committee, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, National Social Action Commission, and the Oprah Network Initiative Own Your Health. In addition, she's an active member of American Public Health Association, the Links Incorporated. Actually, she's a member of my chapter, the Columbia, Maryland chapter, and Jack and Jill of America Incorporated, just to name a few. Further, in 2024, Reverend Arline Bradley became the youngest to keynote the Martin Luther King Jr. Beloved Community Commemorative Service, the world renowned annual celebration of Dr. King's birthday, organized by the King Center. A Southern New Jersey native, she earned her undergraduate degree in exercise science and master's in public health from Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. She also graduated from the Samuel Dewitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University with a Master of Divinity, where she too became an ordained minister. Reverend Arline Bradley completed an executive certificate of business management from Howard University and an executive certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University. Reverend Arline Bradley is a lover of all things sports, music, and an avid resort traveler. Most important to her is her faith and family, as she enjoys being a wife to Andrew Bradley and mother of two children. Please join me in welcoming this wonderful, dynamic woman to the stage, Reverend Siobhan Arline Bradley.
Madam Area Director, can you hear me?
I can.
Right. Madam Area Director, thank you so much. It is so good to see you on the screen. And let me just say to all that are joining tonight, I'm getting the text messages. It's going to be an electric night because we are talking about what it means to be beyond the ballot. There are so many conversations that have been happening. We just experienced a very interesting election cycle in 2025. And all roads, my sisters and those that are watching online, are leading to 2026. So tonight, you're going to get frontline information. Tonight, the Links Incorporated, the Eastern area, is gathering some of our country's finest minds in activism, in healthcare, in politics, in law, but most importantly, in the lives of Black women and their families. So let's set the stage tonight. You're going to hear from very, very important guests. Dr. Sharon Austin, Dr. Regina Davis Moss, the Honorable Morgan Cephas, and Dana Stebbins. Now, we're going to talk about some serious conversations, our post-election legislation, the impacts on what's happening, the restructuring of the federal government, yes, the Department of Education, the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. I like to say the words out loud so people hear them. The attacks on women's health and reproductive rights, and the attempts to erase Black history and culture from schools and institutions. And I must say this as a point of personal privilege. As the president of NCNW, the Links Incorporated are a national affiliate of our organization. And we stand as the only Black and woman-owned building on Pennsylvania Avenue. And we know firsthand the challenge it feels to be a federal entity in the middle of an administration that seems to be leaning in on Black history being erased. So the Links have always stayed incorporated with our work and engaged on conversations like tonight. So let's get this conversation started. I want to turn to our first panelist, Dr. Sharon Austin. Now, Dr. Austin comes to us as a massive expert. She's a professor of political science at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on African-American women's political behavior, African-American mayoral elections, rural political activism, and yes, African-American political behavior. I want you to know she's the author of 5 academic books with topics that we're all interested in: race, group consciousness, and political participation in America. Political Black Girl Magic. We need to figure out how to read that immediately. And multiple other titles. She has published book chapters and articles and was the first African-American editor of the American Political Science Review. And in 2024, she self-published her first children's book entitled Alan Learns to Talk, discussing her family's experience with nonverbal autism. She is completing now Say It to My Face: Black Women, Social Justice, and the Presidency. My friends that are listening, please welcome to the stage tonight, Sharon Austin. Dr. Austin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Oh my goodness. I'm intrigued by even the titles. We're so honored to have you tonight.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction.
Well, let's jump right in, Dr. Austin, because you are our internal expert on some of these issues. And I want to start here. There was this piece of legislation called the Big Beautiful Bill. We've seen state redistricting efforts, states like Texas, states like Indiana, Missouri, executive orders that have eliminated DEI. As we think about all of these things that are happening, what can communities do to mitigate these attacks and at the same time continue to engage in advocacy efforts?
Well, I think the main thing that communities can do is to have discussions like the one that we're having tonight to make people aware of some of the issues and to talk about the dynamics, some of the information that people may not know about the various forms of legislation that have been passed in different states, including in the state where I live here in Florida. And I think
Yes.
also it's important to support civil rights organizations. I've done a lot of work with the ACLU, the NAACP, and others. The Links is also not so much a civil rights organization, but also is a very important organization that educates people about various issues, but really just make people aware. And then also when it comes to Black history, I'm sure we're going to be talking about this tonight. It's important for us to educate our own communities instead of expecting other people to do it for us. So those are just some of the things that we can do, just supporting each other and supporting those really important organizations.
Yeah, I love this kind of context around commitment, right? Committing to institutions that do this work. Now, you named the Links Incorporated, and we pride ourselves in our programming. And you also referenced the idea of making sure the community teaches itself. We teach our own history, that we integrate our history into our daily lives. How can organizations like the Links Incorporated and our partners form collaborations to work to restore funding needed to continue our work? Because it does take resources to do this work.
Absolutely. I think
Okay.
that's the most important thing about not relying on governmental assistance, because what the
Woo.
government gives, the government can take away easily. And we see that
Yeah.
happening now. And it's important for us to find ways to fund our own initiatives and fund our own organizations,
Yes.
especially the Black church has always been very much involved in different types of advocacy over the years. And with Black churches, I even can remember growing up in Memphis and having
Mm.
people pass the collection plate to support certain political candidates and to support certain causes. And so that's just one way that we can do
Yeah.
it. And then also really trying to expect that people who have resources, who are middle class and upper middle class, to not turn their backs on communities, and that they provide financial and other assistance as well.
I'm gonna say pass the plate. I mean, that's gonna be my theme tonight. We've got to pass the plate for the work that we want to do, for the work that we need to advance. And and I've heard similar stories that there used to be a time where passing the plate, we would pass memberships to the NACP, we would pass memberships to these organizations. And I think that it's really important to talk about the idea of self-funding. And listen, we know things are happening now. The government just reopened. So we know that resources are in some cases are scarce, but in others they're not. Can you talk to us, Dr. Austin, about what strategies should be prioritized to protect and advance civil and democratic rights amidst all of the challenges that we're naming? I mean, we've talked about everything: EOs, DEI programs, right? Redistricting.
Mhm.
How do we make those changes?
I think we can make those changes, first of all, by not being afraid to do something. Because one of the things that I've found here in Florida, as a person who
Mhm.
has been a plaintiff in lawsuits that have been defending DEI
Yes.
and involved as an expert witness in cases that are fighting voting rights discrimination, other forms of discrimination, a lot of people ask me, well, how can you do that? Aren't you
Mhm.
afraid? And that type of thing. And I think it's important for people who are in the position to speak out to do so. And you
Yeah.
would really be surprised and disappointed to find that there are so many people in certain positions who can at least try to do something, but they won't because they're so busy trying to protect what they have. They don't want to lose their jobs. I don't think anyone does, but it's
Yeah.
important in order to bring about change, someone has to put themselves out there and take a risk. And it's important that someone be willing to do that.
You know, I we're going to transition in a second, but I think that you're bringing up a valid point. Many people are asking, how do I do my part in this moment when there's so many risks? But then I often try to think about, what did it take for our ancestors, for those that came before us? The risk for them was not only just their jobs, but in many cases, their lives. And as you think about that, when we have to think about how we prioritize, I think it's pertinent for us to share that our moment now might be just as critical as it was for those that were trying to actually gain access to civil rights. Would you agree?
I would agree wholeheartedly. My parents
Mhm.
were sharecroppers in Mississippi. My father was born in
Wow.
1938, my mom in 1940. And I feel like if they could challenge the type of society that they lived in, surely I can challenge the type of society that I live in.
Yeah, Dr. Austin gave us the marching orders there, right? We have no excuses. And,
Absolutely.
being in the state of Florida, you're seeing the front line. You're seeing the state laws that are being passed. And I'm just going to say it. She already said pass the plate, y'all. Elections have consequences. And I think we want to make sure that we engage in that discussion. Dr. Austin, we're going to be bringing you back in a few minutes. You really gave us some insights on how to think about the engagement, how to look at how communities have opportunities, and also collaborations, right? Faith leaders, other institutions, the Links Incorporated. We as an organization have partners all over the country and, yes, all over the world that are interested and committed to advancing civil rights. Dr. Austin, thank you for your time. Don't leave us, because we're coming back to you soon. We've got so much more to share with you. Your insights have been amazing. I'm going to turn this panel to our next guest. I know her very well. Her name is Dr. Regina Davis Moss. Now, Dr. Regina Davis Moss is an expert. She works at the intersection of public health, media, and culture change. That has been her life and her career, empowering women and adolescent girls to make healthy decisions about the urgent challenges that they face every single day. She's a health equity, sexuality, and reproductive health expert, and uses her experience to make community places that welcome and support everyone. She serves currently as the president and CEO of In Our Own Voice, the National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, and the In Our Own Voice Action Fund. Now, she was the Associate Director of Public Health Policy and Practice for the American Public Health Association in the past, and she provided oversight and leadership for a broad range of issues, and she has held senior management positions at Kaiser Family Foundation and, yes, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And she is an author of the award-winning Black Women's Reproductive Health and Sexuality, a holistic public health approach, and is a proud member of the HHS facet, which is Health and Human Services facet of the Capital City, Washington, D.C. chapter of the Links Incorporated. Dr. Moss, are you there? Can you hear us?
I am. Thank you so much for that generous introduction.
I'm so glad to see you tonight.
I'm so glad too. Anytime I have the opportunity to talk about reproductive justice and how we're fighting for our families and our communities, I'm like all in.
Listen, it's an honor to have you. I know your work very, very well. And I want to tap into a topic that, I don't know, sometimes it takes personal convictions to another level, right? We're talking about women's bodies, our choices, our health, our reproductive health, very sensitive topics. When I think about anti-abortion efforts across the country, when I think about the impact of women's health care, and I've got to jump in head first because we just had a government shutdown. Listen, y'all, predicated on the tax subsidies expiring December 31st, the Affordable Care Act. Some call it Obamacare. Some call it its full name, the Patient Protection and Affordable Health Care Act. So let's talk about the ACA. What provisions of the ACA benefit women specifically, and are those provisions now at risk?
Yeah, let me just do something here because, people might be like, well, why are you talking about those things when you fight for reproductive health and reproductive justice?
Sure.
And let me just tell you that they are absolutely inseparable, the ballot and the body and reproductive health. Now, reproductive health is really about the services that you receive. Reproductive rights is essentially the Constitution. That's the right for you to have an abortion. And I fight for reproductive justice. And that was created 30 years ago by these 12 amazing Black women who very much during a time similar to this, it was in the Clinton health reform era. And they understood that we can't talk about things like abortion and health reform without talking about these larger issues that Black women face. Things like maternal health, economic stability, racial discrimination in healthcare, environmental justice. And so that conversation began then 30 years ago, bring us up to the Affordable Care Act, which for all its imperfections, as people like to say, it finally began to reflect this larger pieces and this larger holistic vision that Black women were talking about. Now, you asked me about the Affordable Care Act provisions. So let me just run through these.
Yeah, but we needed that context. That was helpful.
Thank you. So there's some key provisions that have really benefited women, especially Black women. So things like the Medicaid expansion, it dramatically reduced uninsured rates for Black women and improved our access to things like prenatal care, postpartum care, chronic disease care. Currently it's at high risk of the subsidies being eliminated, which we know. The essential health benefit, I know you worked on a lot of that when you were at HHS. So maternity care, mental health services, contraception, preventive services like our cancer screenings. These are the backbone of the essential reproductive care that we need. That's at risk. They're talking about narrowing it and allowing states to do that. Coverage for contraception without cost sharing. That's under active threats. Protecting, one of the key things for us was protecting us from, being eliminated for pre-existing conditions.
That's right.
Pregnancy used to count as one of those, but things like if you had diabetes, well, that is a major issue for our community. But then there are things like 12-month postpartum care that we know that Black women are disproportionately impacted by maternal mortality. Over 3/4 of those things are happening during a time when we know they're preventable. And so that's why having that postpartum care 12 months later, it has a major, impact. And then just like the non-discrimination protection. So, you could no longer be discriminated based on your race, your language, your disability. And so that's also very vulnerable under this changing rulemaking. So that just kind of summarizes it. I'm happy to talk more about that.
Well, I want to lean in here because I almost, Dr. Regina, feel like we're rolling our hands back in time. Because when we're thinking about protections for women, I remember going through the process. I was around the HHS at the time, and even at the NACP when we saw that law signed in 2010. It's been 15 years since the Affordable Care Act has actually been a law. And I remember people thinking there's no way that women are being discriminated against, when in actuality, being a woman was actually a risk factor and
That's
named, right? And so these provisions that at that time, that was under the Obama administration when it passed, but folks in healthcare have been trying to do this for decades. So when we got this passed, we saw these benefits come forward. And now that we're talking about these potential subsidies being discontinued, I mean, what does that mean for those that are listening? Because I think sometimes we don't talk about how those premiums will change because the Affordable Care Act has given us so much cover over this period of time.
Yeah. So put simply, without those subsidies, their premiums will skyrocket.
That's
People will see their premiums increase on average, 114%. So that means people gone from, a couple hundred to, thousands in some cases. And I cannot forget, that also Medicaid is under attack, right?
Yes,
so just to give you some context for why it is so important for us, 1/4 of Black women, more than half of our girls, and 2/3 of Black births are covered by Medicaid. Slashing it will essentially cripple care for millions of Black families. And, let's be clear, like this assault on reproductive care is an assault on our civil, economic, and democratic rights. Point blank, period.
Point blank. Can you close out with this? Because this is really important to me. And I think that our listeners need to understand that Black maternal health and women's reproductive freedom, we have to advocate for our sisters, for ourselves, our families. Why do we need to continue to advocate in this space? Because let me just tell you, I know it's a hot button issue. Some people have issues, particularly moral religious space. If you grew up in church, you grew up in faith spaces, right? You hear about abortion. Many have a hard time with that. And one of the things that I've tried to help people understand about advancing and supporting and advocating for reproductive freedom, that this is about constitutional freedom, right? Your convictions are what they are. They should stay that way. Your religious beliefs are yours to have. That is a space that should be protected. And so should the freedoms of everyone in this country. Why should we advocate for Black maternal health and women's reproductive freedom?
So as I talked about, you cannot, everybody's had a reproductive event by virtue of us being here,
Everybody.
right? And so you cannot, um, like, we've done the research on this, and I know this is an issue that comes up about, whether or not you're religious, whether you should have that conversation. But really what we favor more than anything, and we've seen this across all age groups in religion, is autonomy.
Yes.
The bodily autonomy, the right to live, love, and thrive, and to make a decision on how and when we want to expand our families. And we have to care about these things because, as always, Black women, we knew when the abortion restrictions came down in 2022, it was going to be bad. We were always the heralds of the danger, and people don't listen to us until the house is on fire, right?
Right.
But I only want to just it's important to keep naming these names, like Amber Thurman, Candy Miller. We just heard about Carrie Jones in Dallas, Mercedes Wells in Indiana. They are people that are needlessly dying because of, in some cases, restrictions, but in other cases, in this most recent one, because of the poor quality of maternity care. And that's undeniable. And, the pathway to parenthood in America is dangerous, and it's unequal, and it's especially so for Black women. And this is why we have to keep fighting for it, because if we don't fight for it, then we don't have it.
Listen, Dr. Regina Davis Moss, you gave us a masterclass tonight. Don't you go anywhere either, my friend. You have to come back. We got to have a larger panel. Thank you so much for getting us to this point. I'm going to now switch gears just a little because we have the Honorable Morgan Cephas on the line. Now, let me just say, Morgan Cephas has had an extensive career in politics. She is and was actually elected to serve in her first term in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in November of 2016. She is a native of West Philadelphia, born and raised. Yes, ma'am. Yes, she is. She's worked tirelessly to forge cross-sector collaborations and partnerships to solve community challenges. Since joining the Pennsylvania House, she's introduced legislation to reverse the trend of maternal mortality. We just talked about it. And improving healthcare for mothers and children, reducing gun violence, and successfully secured over $21 million in state funding for local schools, parks, businesses, and libraries. She is now the majority chairwoman of the Government Oversight Committee and secretary of the Housing and Community Development Committee. She has an extensive career. She has worked in all facets. And beyond City Hall, she has activated in the Philadelphia Youth Network. She's done nonprofit work. And I have to say, she has dedicated her life to public service. She's on the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Board, Infrastructure Investment Authority for Pennsylvania. And she is an active member of Delta Sigma Theta and the Delaware Valley chapter of the Links Incorporated. The Honorable Morgan Cephas. I'm going to say that all night. The Honorable Morgan Cephas. Morgan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh my goodness. I am so excited that we have someone sitting. And may I just add, sitting in the state that has a Black woman speaker? Come on, somebody. Shout out to Joanna McClinton. What a testament to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
Now, there's so many issues happening on state levels. Now, I'm so glad our Link sister is here, activating in the Commonwealth. But when I think about protecting women's health, legislation like the Omnibus Acts that have been passed in your state and others like New Jersey and Virginia, and reproductive freedoms like in the state of Maryland, what support did you need to enact your legislation, and from whom did you need that support?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for having me to be a part of this conversation, and very excited about Speaker Joanna McClinton. We would not be able to move on policies and legislation in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania if she did not have that gavel. Not sure if you heard, but we just passed the Pennsylvania Crown Act.
Crown Act.
We are beyond excited in Pennsylvania. And again, we have that humble majority of one, but we ensure that it is as impactful as possible to ensure that we're impacting the lives of Pennsylvanians. To get a lot of our work across the finish line, we are in a divided legislature, and I know this is a nonpartisan conversation conversation. So we have to ensure that policies that impact urban communities, we have to find like mind and align our strategies with communities that are in both suburban and rural counties. I mean, when we talk about the issue of Medicaid, again, it's not just going to impact us in the city of Philadelphia, but we talk about the rural communities that have limited access to healthcare, that are in maternal health deserts, that have limited access to hospitals. And we know with the cuts and the changes that are happening on the federal level, those hospitals and those institutions will absolutely be impacted and would limit the amount of care for those residents. Here in Pennsylvania, with those impacts to Medicaid, we're looking at potentially 30 hospitals.
Wow.
30 hospitals across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that will be forced to close because of the absence of those subsidies and those resources, particularly also coming from the Affordable Care Act. And, Pennsylvania is a microcosm of so many states across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So it forces us to cross the aisle and, I like to say, not compromise, find common ground on issues that will protect us all. And, one of those issues, as we talked about it in the previous panel, is the issue around access to maternal health care.
Yes.
I have a Republican colleague of mine that actually has to travel 45 minutes outside of Pennsylvania. She has to go into Ohio in order to access obstetric care. And when you have maternity deserts that exist in suburban, rural, and urban areas, this is truly an opportunity for us to come together to move the needle, again, for families that we all absolutely want to protect.
Now, let me tell you, Representative Cephas, you are giving us a masterclass in what it looks like to advance bipartisan content and work.
Yeah.
Because listen, we all come from different backgrounds. We all see things differently. But what is most important is the representation, to have representation that understands the needs of our community. So when you think about you enacting your legislation, you talk specifically about having to cross the aisle. I love that, not about compromise, but common ground. I'm going to give you rights to that, but we're going to say that often, right? Because we need a lot more common ground. If we had more common ground, some things would happen. Let me ask you this. Do you anticipate further efforts at the state level to diminish women's health coverage? What do you think?
Absolutely. You've seen states across the country either introduce or pass laws as it relates to restricting reproductive access throughout this country. And it's really been we've seen that before the fall of Roe v. Wade, but you've seen it heightened in this moment. But you also see, we talk about elections matter. You've seen state after state introduce ballot initiatives to amend their constitutions to enshrine the right to reproductive care and reproductive freedoms in their constitution. So elections are actually impacting these conversations in real time. But it's an onslaught of so many things that are happening with, just women's health care coming from the federal level, whether that, again, be the loss of Roe v. Wade protections or the elimination of Title X funding from Planned Parenthood, which is about family planning care. Or when you think about what's happening with Medicaid restrictions and the Affordable Care Act, all of these issues are forcing states and localities to step up in this moment to ensure that the foundation of women's health care has a foundation that is strengthened, and individuals across states and communities are able to access affordable care in their immediate backyards. But it's also about culturally competent care and having access to the medical professionals that you need in order to have the dignity when it comes to accessing the healthcare that you want and need.
And this is a big deal. I want to thank you for this. And now I just want to say to those that are listening, we are listening to a woman who stood up and ran for elected office. I want to just go ahead and shout out Black women that run for office. We have someone in our organization who has not only put her money where her mouth is, but has also stood 10 toes down on ensuring women's health coverage is intact and that she's willing to do the hard work. So if anybody's out there thinking about running for office, you have an example right here the Honorable Morgan Cephas, giving us the nuggets that we need. Now, I've got to bring you back as well, Representative Cephas, so don't go far. We're going to have one more conversation before this full panel comes together. Thank you for setting it straight for us and getting us together. And go Birds, because she's a Philly girl, and I'm an Eagles fan, and I can't help it. So I've got to shout us out. So good to see you. And we are ready to hear one more panelist before we do our larger panel. And you saw her in the beginning, none other than Sister Dana B. Stebbins, Esquire. Sister Dana is here tonight. You had a chance to see her in the introduction, but let me just tell you a little bit about her. Not only is she the Eastern Area Legislative and Public Affairs Committee chair and a member of the Mount Rose, Maryland chapter of the Links, but she is an attorney with advanced degree in human behavior and more than 25 years of experience in law and social policy and private practice of real estate and land use law. She also is the president and CEO of the Cornelius Group and the law offices of Dana B. Stebbins, Esquire. Now, what's amazing about her, she has served in all three branches of government. Judicial clerk to the judge, William Pryor. She was a legislative counsel to the chair of the House Committee on Small Business and a presidential appointee under President James Earl Carter to the SBA and to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Now she's a member of the Legal Collaborative, which is a group of 100 plus African-American lawyers, hear this, because I know her work, dedicated to the preservation and protection of Black history and culture in institutions, libraries, and museums throughout the U.S. The collaborative's focus is the protection of the African American Museum of Art and Culture in D.C. This effort is called America's History SOS. And look it up, please, America's History SOS.org. Please welcome back to the stage, Sister Dana B. Stebbins. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
It's good to see you again, my friend.
Thank you.
We've got to talk about this issue. And I've actually had a chance to hear about this work and super excited about what you all are doing. This erasure of Black history, particularly in public institutions like the Smithsonian, book bans in public schools, seeing the destruction of artifacts in museums that focus on slavery and the aftermath of slavery in the United States. Now, what would you say does the EO 14253, which was directing J.D. Vance to do with regard to the National Museum of African American History and Culture? We call it the museum down here in D.C. What does that executive order direct them to do?
Thank you for asking me that, because it sets the stage for everything I'm going to talk about.
Yes.
And rather than paraphrase it, I'm going to read the first part of it to you.
Please.
The executive order is called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. By the power authorized and vested in me as president, by the Constitution and laws of the United States, I hereby declare that over the past decade, Americans have witnessed a concerted and widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology rather than truth. This revisionist movement seeks to undermine the remarkable achievements of the United States by casting its founding principles and historical milestones in a negative light. And under this revision, our nation's unparalleled legacy of advancing liberty, individual, and human rights is reconstructed as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. That is how the executive order starts.
Wow.
It sets out and commands a process that will be led by the Vice President of the United States, who is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Smithsonian.
Yes.
To survey the institution of the African American Museum of History and Culture, and to catalog all of the artifacts that are deemed by this administration to be untrue, irrelevant, or racist, because it promotes history as it truly is. And so this gives them carte blanche to go into this museum and others and remove artifacts that the White House finds objectionable, to tear down displays,
Wow.
to limit photographic history and remove it, and to otherwise erase a significant portion of our whole culture and history. That's what the executive order does.
I mean, I don't think any of us could have ever imagined, with all of the work that had gone into that museum's existence, the legislation, the support, the grand opening, and now we're at almost 10 years later, and this. Now, let me ask you this: what steps have been taken to support the museum, and quite frankly, our own Dr. Lonnie Bunch?
Well, the legal collaborative, which you mentioned, I am a part of, one of the founding members of,
Yes,
has 3 active committees.
okay.
One is litigation. So we are filing litigation both here and in other states to protect funding for these museums.
Okay.
Unfortunately, as Dr. Austin said earlier, most of these are publicly funded, not
Absolutely.
privately funded. And so the first move that they have made is to try to restrict the funding and take it back. We are litigating that. The second is to develop an educated electorate. We are having a petition drive where we have written a petition asking that the president, or demanding that the president rescind his executive order and protect Dr. Bunch and the African American Museum. It is online under change.org, and we are urging people in the thousands to share that and sign it, because we will deliver those petitions to the Board of Trustees of the Smithsonian and hopefully demonstrate the depth of support that this museum has. The last thing is that we realize that there is now a supposedly employee evaluation for Dr. Bunch, where he is being evaluated, and he has received a letter that's 5 pages long that tells him what he will be evaluated on. And it has nothing to do with facts, truth, or reality. Wow. It is all about whether he complies with the ideology set forth by this administration. So we are also actively working at the congressional level to develop support for Dr. Bunch and support for the institution.
Now, we want to get involved. Is there a website we should go to?
Yes. You can go to America's History SOS. That is a website, but it is also where the petition will be found. On the website, you can find the petition. You can read all about America's history. You can contribute, because we need funding to fight. In any war, you need funding and resources. So you can go to America's History SOS and find everything you need there.
Dana Stebbins is getting us ready, is a founding member of this collaborative of African American lawyers. I had a chance to see you share specifically in this Congressional Black Caucus. So super excited about this. And if you are listening and watching, please go to the website. Please support. We want to thank you for not only sharing, but giving us some call to action. I'm going to ask all the panelists now to come back and join us so we can have this full Black woman magic conversation because we got some magic on the line. We've got our leaders in political science, reproductive health. We have our lawyer extraordinaire, and yes, Madam Representative from the state of Pennsylvania. So let's just get into this conversation. First of all, I hope that I know I don't see the chat, but I'm hoping that the listeners are understanding what you're getting tonight. You're getting firsthand information about what is happening beyond the ballot. So at this point, we've talked about a number of areas, and I want to ask this question, and then of course we're going to have some time to engage, I think, with some audience questions as well. What are the most pressing areas where activism can make a difference prior to these midterm elections? Because 2026 is here. Like, y'all get ready. Christmas is coming. Okay, we're already there, which means we're ready for a new year. But this is going to be a pivotal midterm election. So right now, in terms of our activism, what's going to make a difference before the midterms? Anybody want to start there?
I'd like to start. I would say that the main thing we need to do is register as many people to vote as possible, because one of the unfortunate things in American politics is that in midterm elections, the turnout falls, especially among people of color and especially among African American voters. And especially among younger voters. And those are usually the voters that are more likely to support the types of initiatives that we've been talking about tonight. So I would say register people to vote, not today, yesterday. Mobilize in every community, whether it be in not just political organizations, but mobilize people to register, and also especially focus on telling people who are younger the importance of voting, because so many of my students tell me that they have friends who don't vote. And another thing we need to do when we think about registering people to vote is think about class issues. And unfortunately, some people who are poor tend to look at groups like this and people like us as being rather elitist, and they don't think they can relate to us. And they feel that voting doesn't really impact their lives, but actually it has more of an impact on them in many cases than it does on us. So I would just say focus on that.
Yeah, GOTV. Who else? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
So I want to jump in. I would say all politics, all elections are local. And I think we have to ensure that we're paying attention to the hyper localized issues that are happening in our community in real time, where because our attention is just, in so many different places and we're tackling so many different issues at the same time, it's almost like building a plane and flying it at the same time, which is really what we have to do leading up to the 2026 election. So it's about continuing having these conversations and elevating the issues that we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C. and, on the federal government. So every executive order, every conversation, start talking about, for example, the elimination of SNAP benefits and that having a real live impact. Or we're talking about the rising cost of living. We have to keep having these discussions.
We do.
But then also we have to address them in real time. So when you see a series of, workers coming from big name companies going on strike, we have to join those picket lines, explain the importance of, being able to unionize, explain the importance of what a family sustaining wage actually looks like in this country. So when we look at communities and look at the hyper local issues, we got to pay attention to the school board all the way to the Senate and making sure that we're addressing those issues in real time so people can have faith again in their government and their elected officials, that they will not only stand up, but will address their challenges in real time to ensure that they're able to live their lives with dignity.
Absolutely. Anyone else before we turn? The question is about these pressing areas of activism prior to the midterms.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Well, let's say this. Even though there is an attempt to try to remove us, it's still important for us to continue to try to be in places where we can have a seat at the table.
That's right.
Because, the representation is still critical. I mean, we're the ones that fight for justice. We're the ones that are going to center our issues. So continue to be in those spaces. And this just speaks to people who, everybody is not going to want to be in the streets. Everybody doesn't consider themselves to be an activist, but you can still have an impact. And, this audience in particular, we're perfectly poised, deep roots in the community, deep roots in our local chapter, but, and we have some influential places where we can broker for our communities. So absolutely continue to do that. We have a younger generation that is going to be eligible to vote, already. Gen Z is voting. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to develop those leaders. So young Black women, gender expansive leaders. This needs to be a big tent right now. We need to have cross-sector alliances. That's the strategy we need right now.
I love that. Sister Dana?
Yeah, I just want to say everything we're talking about relates to our democracy, our freedoms that we have always taken for granted, that we are gradually losing bit by bit. So this election coming up is a fight, yes, for the individual issues we're talking about, but it's a fight to save our democracy. And the only way we can save our future is to become engaged, to become educated, to become active. And all of us have the responsibility to do that.
I love that. I love that. I'm plugging in. I'm getting a little low on juice. So I'm going to plug this in and ask the next question. Now, we're talking about local politics, national politics. Let's talk about local and national advocacy group mobilization. How do we mobilize effectively to address all these policy shifts? I mean, we have seen so many changes happen. How do our groups mobilize more effectively? Because if we've got to realize, I've experienced this at NCNW. There's so many things. Every day there's a new thing. So how do we hone in and become more efficient and effective in our policy shifts? Anybody want to start?
I'll jump in.
I mean,
Sure.
I would say we in this moment have to meet people where they are. Yes, again, we have to have these virtual conversations, but we also have to utilize the various social media platforms to get out as much information as possible. But we also have to ensure that it includes a call to action, whether that means, contact your legislator, make a contribution to the organizations that are on the front line defending our rights across this country, or whether that means, getting involved on a text thread or creating, again, there's a series of apps that we can be utilizing better to not only provide information, but also to organize. I think we also have to go a little old school and continue having those in-person town hall meetings.
Come on.
Where people are able to come out, ask questions, get answers. But again, it's always ensuring that there is a call to action every time that we are engaging with each other. And I know someone else mentioned that we have to coordinate with the various organizations that are tackling multiple different issues at the same time. If we can work collaboratively together to find, a core top 3 issues that we want to focus on in the immediate community, because again, all things are local. What is happening in, Philadelphia might not be happening in Baltimore. And we need to be able to, tailor our message, our information, and our calls to action based on those individual communities.
Anyone else on that?
I mean, I want to acknowledge that, what's happening right now is by design, right? I mean,
Yes,
it is meant to keep us on our heels and to be reactionary. But, the strategy, and this is not necessarily new because we have done this as a community, is really getting back to that, what we call that long haul organizing. So then rather than only focusing on this moment, we've got things already there. So each time there's a new threat, we're not having to start over. So that community leadership, organizational capacity, political consciousness, having networks that can quickly mobilize, and having a pipeline of future leaders so that we are ready. And I know that seems sort of like in theory, but I mean, these are things that we know work, and that's what we need to be continuing to put into place. And we're seeing it, we're seeing how that's working in places like Memphis and places where they're having to meet the current moment, but they've already got the trust and the roots in the communities.
Anyone else before we move on?
I wanted to just say that in order to mobilize, we first of all have to fully understand the constraints that we're facing, and I think that we do. But one of the things that I'm noticing as a college professor, and I was just talking to someone about this last week, about the fact that students aren't as active. And this person was saying to me, well, students aren't really as activists as they were 10 years ago. And I don't think that's true. I just think that even in my state, there have been laws that have been passed that have said that there are consequences for different organizations. And there was one organization in particular that was targeted, that they were trying to destroy. And students are aware of that. And they're aware that there's more of a likelihood now that they'll be kicked out of school, just even for things that they could do maybe 5 years ago. So we have to understand that young people are meeting, and young people are interested in what's happening, and they are mobilizing, but they just may not be doing it in a way that we can see it. But we have to reach out to them and find out what their concerns are and what help they need in mobilizing, because there are so many constraints there for this generation that weren't there just a few years ago.
That's exactly right. Now, you brought it in. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go off script and sneak in an audience question, because you talked about young people, and I don't want to miss the young people. And I want to read this question that came from the audience. And the question is: as the federal government continually depletes departments and benefits our dollars pay for, i.e., the Department of Education dismantling, threats on automatic stabilizers, how do we use our voices to protect our constitutional rights? And this young person says, I'm a minor and I don't receive optimistic answers to these concerns, but I'm aware that my population is greatly affected by these executive decisions. First of all, whoever wrote that, you're on your way to be our next president of the United States. So I'm just grateful that you asked that question. But can I bring that in? I mean, because young people are aware. We are giving them a bad rap. They're actually way more engaged than many other people are. They have different methods and they have to go underground for a lot of their work. I think we need to say that. But let's talk to this minor, right? How do they use their voices even when they're not able to vote yet? What can young people do? Now, we can't be silent on this one. We got to answer this question.
I feel like I'm always talking, but I'll
No,
jump
get in there. Jump in there.
Utilize your networks. I mean, we've seen how social media was so powerful. You all are masters of that.
Oh my God.
And this is how, I mean, the research is clear. This is where people are going to learn that, you know, when you are voting or when you're talking about, when you are having conversations, even though you can't vote, you can tell people that can vote what issues are important to you. I mean, this is what we call relational education or organizing. So that is critical. So continue to do that. Continue to share. And it's never too early to get involved. I mean, you volunteer in campaigns, read up, there's all kind of ways that you can be priming and ready so that when it's nothing better than the first marching in when you can finally vote and knowing exactly who you want to vote for and knowing who is going to center your needs.
Yeah. And let me just offer this. Okay, Dr. Austin.
Well, I was just going to say that, first of all, I applaud this young person for being here, for having the interest in wanting to hear. Well, because that's the first step in making sure that you're aware of what's going on. Because one problem that we have as adults, especially those of us who are parents, is that we try to protect our kids and we try to shield them, especially when they're minors. We don't want them to hear about these depressing things, but that's the worst thing we can do, because as she said, children and young people have a lot of influence on adults, and especially on their parents and grandparents. And even though they themselves may not be in a position to vote right now, they will be in the future. And they also can influence people who are able to vote now. So I would say just by making yourself aware of what's going on, coming to and listening to conversations like this, and also influencing the people who are older in your life who actually can vote.
Yeah.
And I just say, we're coming up on the holidays.
Yeah.
What a great conversation to have right now.
And I think,
just things you learn.
Just to add this point, when our young people are turning 18 years old at this point, they are turning 18 years old with less voting rights and less reproductive freedoms than we had and what our parents had. And I think it's young people that sparked a conversation when it came to gun violence in this country, that, not necessarily you saw too much action on the federal level, but it helped to elect one of the first Gen Z Congress members to office, where as a direct result, there was a department, I know it doesn't exist today, but there was a department, specifically focused on how gun violence shows up in urban, suburban, and rural communities. And that conversation was sparked by a bunch of young high schoolers that were sick and tired of not doing fire drills. Instead of doing fire drills, they were doing active shooter drills. And your generation is just dealing with so many different issues all at the same time that is oftentimes difficult for adults. But, as one of the panelists stated, you have social media where you can organize a meetup of more than thousands of young people in a matter of a minute that takes some adults close to a month or two just to be
The
able to pull
plan.
together. Yes.
You know,
So,
I think we gotta also reiterate what our ancestors did. When you think about Birmingham in
Oh, yeah.
1963, right? So when the four little girls were bombed in that church, you know, what was happening was there were dogs being, you know, released onto 13, 14, 15-year-old young people who were leaving school to march. And I'm saying get permission from mom first, but you have to have that kind of resilience in your heart that says, listen, young people actually moved the country even in the
Mhm.
60s. Well, they
absolutely.
could not vote. Well, that time they didn't even have the right to vote. But if
Mhm.
you think about what we're talking about, what can you do? Not only can you mobilize and educate, but also young people do have the ability to have voice, to start exposing what they're seeing, to talking about their stories. Storytelling is a great way to do this. Don't miss a storytelling
Mhm.
opportunity. So I
Right.
wanted to do that. I
Yeah.
had to get that in there because oh my
Mhm.
gosh, our future is okay. Whoever was, stay in touch with us. I've got to ask some more questions here. This is a great
And
question. Oh,
and
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to
You couldn't
just,
hold it. Go ahead,
just
Regina. You couldn't hold it.
yes, Claudette Colvin, the Little Rock Nine, the people that sat at the lunch counters, those
Yeah.
were teens.
Teenagers. They were teenagers. They were teenagers. That's why Black history,
Yeah.
Dana Stebbins, is everything. We've got to tell these
Correct.
stories. Now, I got to say this great question that just came in. Last year's election was a painful example of collective apathy. How do you believe we can address this lack of involvement and increase in community engagement? What is stopping us? Anybody, any answers for this one? What's stopping us?
Let me try this one
Sure.
because we are the Links as an organization are now engaged in bringing civics back into
Yes,
education.
indeed.
We have found that because of the elimination of civics in the curriculum, people don't understand government. They don't understand how it works. So we are taking it back into high schools, junior high schools, and colleges, and having town hall on campus discussions about what democracy means, what your
Mhm.
rights are, but what your responsibilities are, so that people understand that to protect the government, you have to be engaged in that government. And so
Oh,
we are doing that. It's called LinkedIn Civics. We're very proud of it. We want to spread it as widely as we can. Anybody that wants to participate can do so. And what we're finding is that when you educate young people early enough and they
mm-hmm.
grow up understanding, I don't just have the right to vote, I have the responsibility to vote. And I
That's
have a
right.
responsibility to know who I'm voting for and why I'm voting. They grow up that way. They get engaged. There are at high schools that we've gone to, they're called young politician organizations. That's not really the name, but that's close to it. Those are people that want to run for elective office and they're
Yeah.
in high school and they're learning how the process works. And I think the more we do that, the more we educate our young people, the more we take it from the very bottom to the very top, then we will be able to find a way through this because it doesn't look like it now. But I always say we've been through this before. We will get through it again, but we have to be educated, we have to be smart, we have to
Mm-hmm.
be strategic, and we have to be willing, as Dr. Austin said earlier, we can't hide any longer. We have
Yep.
to be willing to be out front with this battle and fight it at every level we can.
I want to reference the question was interesting that last year's election was painful, right? So 2024. But if you look at 2025 and the two states with the most critical gubernatorial races were in the eastern area, New Jersey and Virginia. And so I have to be honest, the 2025 election excited my soul because what I'm realizing is to this point about what's stopping us. Do you know that black men outperformed everyone except black women at 92% voting in the state of New Jersey? 95% of black women voted in New Jersey. I want to go ahead and start giving us some kudos. We saw some flips in the state of Mississippi. We saw some commission seats change in the state of Georgia. What I'm saying is the 2024 electorate and the 2025 electorate are different. Any other thoughts about that? I mean, are you all feeling optimistic about midterms?
I would say absolutely. I mean, you saw
Yeah.
historic elections here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that flipped in a different direction that in some areas hadn't seen in 113 years. And I think
Right.
it truly was a referendum. And I think it goes to the issue of the collective apathy. When that exists, like it did in 2024, again, elections have consequences. So we saw the largest transfer of wealth happen at the top of the year, but then
Yes.
towards the end of the year, we are seeing the issue of hunger, healthcare, and heat be extremely weaponized. And it really asks the question, what kind of country and what type of government do we want to have, and what type of country do we want to live in? And I think this 2025 election was a referendum on that question.
Do others agree with that?
Well, I
Yes.
think I just wanted to say that I guess I kind of don't agree with the assessment of collective apathy in 2024,
Mm,
because I mean it is true that it was disappointing in the battleground states, especially the blue wall states, in
yeah.
terms of the turnout. And if the turnout had been different in a lot of those urban areas, Kamala Harris would have won those states and would have won the election. And so I'm very, I'm personally am disappointed by that. But I think that the problem was misinformation,
Mm.
Yeah.
because of the type of campaign that and I'm not trying to be biased, but that the Trump campaign was. And I think that he made promises and people remembered his first term and they thought that this was going to be this great economy. He was going to come in office and turn everything around, and, and everything was going to be much better overnight. And now we see that that was not true. So I think people sort of bought into some information that was just not simply not true. And I also think that it's just a case in which we have to admit there still is a lot of sexism in our world, and
Yeah.
especially in African American communities. And it's not something that we feel comfortable talking about, but we do have to question whether or not that played a factor last November.
So I think that this is an interesting conversation, and I know we got notes. Don't worry, we're definitely going to stay nonpartisan. That this is definitely about facts, right? And the facts are that women who have run for president of the United States have not won.
Hmm.
Right? So I think that we need to be very, very factual about that. That's actually not partisan. That's political fact. That a woman has never been the president of the United States. And so I think it's really, really appropriate for us to think about, as we talked about. I love the pushback on collective apathy. I'm saying what we have seen is a response in 2025 that we did not see before. And I suspect in 2026, it's going to be very, very interesting. I want everybody to know the truth. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up for grabs. So when you're thinking about this election, we're talking about getting out the vote for the organization like the Links Incorporated. Our job is to get as many people to the polls as
Hmm.
possible. That is the role of our organization. And so I'm excited about this discussion because it's really bringing in all the questions. Now, with all the misinformation going around during these political climates, how do we properly educate people and ourselves and know who to trust?
Mm.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
I think this might be a good one for an elected person to answer.
Ah,
Okay. I would I would say you have to be forward facing throughout, throughout the year. I mean, it can't just be uh immediately prior to an election. It has to be a constant conversation, to the electorate about what is
mhm,
factual, what is truth. But then also, as an elected official, I am not a trusted messenger in every single circle
that's
that
true.
exists in society. And you have to ensure that, that barber, that hairstylist, that recreation leader is just as informed as the elected official, just as informed as, the president of the series of, nonprofit organizations that obviously have to be nonpartisan. But again, we all have to become trusted messengers in our own immediate circles. And it's a responsibility of us collectively to understand what's happening in our communities at every single level of government. Again, I talk about from the school board all the way to the Senate. We have to educate ourselves, and
Yeah, we
again,
do.
educate our own constituencies, because every single one of us have it. I'm a firm believer just in this moment. The politicians actually don't have the power right now. It is the people that has the power. And you have seen that again in the past election cycle, this 2025, that the people have spoken as to what kind of government they want, what type of country that they want. And that is what we have to continue with the momentum in 2026. But this has to be, everyday conversations. I mean, it goes back to, civics in our classroom. Every single person that is a part of society that is impacted by our politics and these policies and legislative decisions has to become a subject matter expert in the issue that they care about the most. And again, they have to be the trusted messenger for their own constituents.
Yeah. So we've got time for about one or two more questions, and I do want to say one more thing about misinformation, though. So this is something that we're working on actually at NCNW, and definitely want to share that we've been posting something called Black Media Monday, because misinformation and disinformation is so easy. You can get on a microphone, have a podcast, and say anything. You can say the sky is green and black, and if someone has a base, they're going to believe the sky is green and black, right? And so what we've tried to do, and have worked with our affiliates, Links Incorporated being one of them, is to highlight those Black media voices on independent spaces that are not tainted one way or the other, right? And so that is one way to really see what platforms are actually teaching content that makes sense for the communities that we represent. I'll always try to help people understand everybody's opinion does not have to be your experience. So be very, very careful about where you get your information from. So I'm so glad you asked that question. I want to make sure I do two things. The one question that did come in, it talks about right now, talking about younger generations, that the change they're facing and the apathy that we think young people are showing. But it's more important ever than right now to remain focused. As wise community leaders, what advice do you have for younger advocates when counterproductive and apathetic narratives are drowning out voices? Meaning young people are being drowned out by other voices. What do y'all say to that? We got a lot of young people questions. I want to say this because we all look very young. Thank you so much for giving us all these young people questions. I love it. Any thoughts about that? How we give advice for younger advocates when counterproductive and apathetic narratives drown out their voices? That's interesting.
I would say to study your history, because I'm teaching the class this semester, and we were talking about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and also the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party, the different ideologies of different young people who were active in the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And there always were apathetic voices, especially for people who believed in Black Power. A lot of the older established civil rights activists didn't like what the young people had to say. And I think that's been the case throughout history. So I would say study your history and look at what happened in the past when people were confronted with similar types of issues, and just try to learn from that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at it. Dr. King was 26 when he started his work. We really, like, our Divine Nine organizations were all started by college students. The work that we do and have advocated for have had young people at the forefront of everything. So I love that. And there's a question also for Sister Dana. The question was about the petition. How do we get copies of that petition? How do we share with family, friends, and organizations? What is our role in this?
Oh, I'm glad that question came up. That petition is online at change.org, but it is also on America's History SOS website. You can respond to it online. You can sign it online, but you can also share it with people. You can send it to people who will also sign it. And it is critical because we are trying to get to 500,000 signatures by the time the Board of Trustees meets in January. So everybody has an opportunity to weigh in on this one. Young, old, older, weigh in on this one. Sign the petition so that there is no denying. This is the most visited museum in the Smithsonian repertoire.
That's right.
Bigger than Air and Space and any other museum you might have heard about. More people visit this museum than any other museum. So please go change.org, America's History SOS. Find the petition, sign it, and return it. Please.
I love it. Well, closing words, real quick for all of our panelists. Give us our marching orders. What is your take-home message for those that have jumped on tonight before we turn it back over to our Eastern Area Director? Closing words. How do we do our collaborative work? What are our next steps? Give us our charge. I'm going to start with Sister Dana.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say what I always say. Democracy is strongest when people are involved. We determine our future. We are the determinants, but we have to be engaged. So my call to action, if you call it that, is for everyone at any level to get engaged. At your civic association, at your family dinner table, at your sorority or fraternity meeting. Become engaged in a process or dialogue and education that will lead us to be able to lead this country out of where we are now, because it will take us leading to get there.
I love that. Dr. Austin.
Well, I would just say to refer to two women that I greatly admired, the late Ella Baker and the late Fannie Lou Hamer, both of whom were activists. Ella Baker talked about group-centered leadership, and she talked about the fact that leadership should not be top-down because it appears to be elitist. Make sure that every segment of the community, every community is involved, and every community feels that their voice is heard, because if not, you're bound to alienate people, and you're going to have different types of divisions along age lines, along class lines, etc.
Yeah.
So my marching order is to make sure that everyone's opinion is valued.
Thank you. Dr. Regina.
That was great. I mean, a lot of what has been said, I want to echo. And I just add that, it may seem like they're winning, but this is really not a time to mourn what's been lost. It's really a time to continue to think about the world that we want to create. Black women have always been on the front lines of that. And so remember that our ballot, the ballot, is our voice. We, the people, will always speak, and we are the people that will, decide the direction. And, of course, I have to speak about reproductive justice. Our bodies are our truth. And so let's just continue to be the architects of our own justice.
Let's continue to be the architects of our own justice. That's a drop the mic on there, Dr. Regina. And let's close it out with the Honorable Morgan Cephas.
I would echo what everybody else is saying as well. You get the democracy that you fight for. And like the late Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm stated, if you don't have a seat at the table, you bring your folding chair. And you make sure once you get there, you shake that table up, because if you're not at the table, you're actually on the menu. But don't get to the table and, start eating from the same menu. It actually has to be reflective of where you've come from. And I would just say, find your place in this moment. Find the issue that you most care about and organize and mobilize around that issue. Also identify like-minded people, like-minded organizations that you want to be a part of to ensure that they are fighting for the issue that you care about the most. And I think the most critical thing right now is we have to use this moment in time, not just as a moment, but we have to use it as a movement to ensure that, again, we shape the democracy and the government that we want to see.
I love that. I love that. I'll close out with you all. I call it my 3 C's. Don't forget, have a consumer strategy, a constituent strategy, and a commitment strategy, right? Make sure that you activate with brands that value you as a people. Make sure as constituents, we not only get out the vote, but we track and identify those districts where our votes have made a difference. And then a commitment strategy. Commit to supporting a Black institution, commit to supporting a Black business, and commit to supporting Black families. We are members of the Links Incorporated, and this is the work that we do. I have been so moved tonight. Dana Stebbins, Dr. Sharon Austin, Dr. Regina Davis-Moss, and the Honorable Morgan Cephas. Thank you all so much. What a conversation. What a night. We're going to turn over to our Eastern Area Director, the one and only Dr. Lisa Lowry Lomas. Thank you all so much for having us. What a night, Madam Area Director.
What a night indeed. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for a wonderful, enriched, engaging, inspiring conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our dynamic, engaging, fabulous moderator. I don't know about you, but I was truly inspired this evening. I want to say to our young people, thank you for joining us. Continue to be engaged. You are our future. Continue to challenge us and continue to push yourself because you are going to help take us someplace where we haven't already been. Educate yourself because when you don't know your history, you are determined to repeat it. And so keep up the energy, stay engaged, stay informed, and make sure that you get out to vote. So I have some takeaways. One of the things is Black history is American history. And so we all have an obligation and all people walking this earth, we have an obligation to make sure that our history that is not erased, but they can't erase the history, although many people are trying to. So I want to charge everyone with making sure that they sign the petition and they get out there to help save our Smithsonian, help save our museum. However, keep in mind, just because artifacts may be removed does not mean the artifacts did not exist. They did exist. And so let's continue to use our voice to continue to lift ourselves up. We'll use our voice by telling our own stories, by telling our history, and by going to vote because all voting is local. So, some of the takeaways from our panelists: no excuses. There is no excuse. Find a topic, find a passion, find an idea, and focus on that. You can't change it all, but find the one thing that you are passionate about and make sure that you go out and support that. What is happening to one is happening to us all. This democracy, this fighting for justice, is not predicated on socioeconomic status, elitism, because what happens to you happens to me. And so our freedoms impacts all of us. And when we're talking about reproductive freedoms, what we're really talking about is constitutional freedoms. Simply the will to be our own individual people. So these are some of my takeaways. And find common ground because we all are human beings and there is something that will bring us all together. So let's find common ground. Again, I'm charging you with signing the petition, sharing the petition, getting out the votes, and being a part of the change. Because if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Thank you again for joining us. I hope that you've been inspired. I hope that you've been motivated. Continue to follow the Eastern area of the Links Incorporated. This is one of a series of webinars we're having. We are also having some in-person town halls. So follow us on social media, EA Links, and stay tuned because more to come. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a good evening.